Battle on the Ice, 1242. On a cold April morning on Lake Peipus, Alexander Nevsky, the Russian commander, scanned the icy expanse, his eyes fixed on the approaching Crusaders. His motley forces, tribal aristocrats, peasant militiamen, and knightly archers, were poised along the shore. The archers cocked their crossbows, ready to unleash a deadly volley. Nevsky's heart sank as the Teutonic knights formed a wedge and charged forward. The Russian prince raised his sword, signalling for defence. The 22-year-old commander had already proven his bravery, but this battle would determine the success or failure of his reign. The moment of reckoning had arrived. By the late 12th century, the eastern Baltic was the last bastion of European paganism, where a variety of tribes lived and fought. The region was characterized by harsh winters and vast forests. Paganism was a source of fear and fascination for medieval Christians, with the loose organization of tribes positioned between the Catholic West and the Orthodox East. Livonia, which includes present-day Latvia and Estonia, became a pivotal center during this period. The Baltic Crusades, initiated by German and Scandinavian traders, saw attempts by ecclesiastical and military groups, such as the Brethren of the Sword and the Teutonic Knights, to convert the local population to Christianity while expanding their territories. Military pressure from the Northern Crusades of the 12th and 13th centuries led to the militarization of the Baltic region, with fortified towns emerging from trading centers. In subsequent years, the Crusaders continued their expansion into Livonia and southern Estonia. The Estonians in the north, supported by local auxiliaries, managed to repel an invading force from the Brethren of the Sword. However, when a Danish crusading force arrived in 1222 and established the fortress of Tallinn, any resistance failed. All of Estonia was divided between the Danish king Valdemar and Bishop Albert of Riga. When a papal legate arrived in 1225, he divided Livonia into principalities under direct papal control. These crusades were characterized by widespread violence and bloodshed, and entire cities were often wiped out. A decade later, Pope Gregory called for another crusade against the pagan Baltic peoples. In late summer, a crusading force arrived from Holstein and asked the leader of the Order of the Sword, Focwin, to lead them into battle. Focwin set his sights on the south. Traditionally, campaigning in the fall and winter was not recommended. However, the Holstein knights arrived too late for a summer campaign and were so convincing that Focwin began organizing an autumn campaign. This was likely against his will. What followed was a devastating ambush by a united pagan army at the Battle of Seoul. They defeated the Order of the Sword, killing most of their knights and their leader. The defeat forced the Brotherhood to merge with the Teutonic Knights. From then on, this branch of the Teutonic Knights became known as the Livonian Order, as the Pope assigned Estonia to the Danes and Latvia to the Livonian Order. The Knights now extended from Poland to Lake Peipus. Their eastward expansion alarmed the Russian cities of the east, especially Novgorod. Medieval Novgorod, a powerful city in northern Russia, was a major trading centre, despite its bleak agricultural prospects. Surrounded by swamps, it flourished on trade routes linking the Gulf of Finland, the Baltic Sea, and Central Asia, trading in furs, walrus ivory, and fish. Founded by Slovenian tribes and later influenced by Kiev, Novgorod's administration included a knyaz, prince, and a powerful town council known as the Vech. The city had a unique character, with a large community of foreign merchants and a mixture of Slavs, Finns, and Balts. However, it faced formidable external threats. Its relations with Pskov, a vassal city with fertile lands, were turbulent. The city's ties with other Russian states and the Orthodox Church reinforced its distinct identity from Catholic Europe. Meanwhile, a scourge confronted it from the east. The Mongols swept into Russia in 1223, brutally destroying cities and earning the feared title of Tatars, roughly meaning people of hell. With death and destruction rife throughout the city, Novgorod adopted a policy of surrender to avoid destruction, even before the Mongols arrived. This approach, coupled with a sudden spring thaw that hindered the Mongol advance, allowed Novgorod to survive and maintain its economic and cultural life under Mongol rule. Alexander Nevsky, the young ruler of Novgorod, embodied this pragmatic approach. Born around 1220, Alexander belonged to a prominent and warrior family. Upon the death of his elder brother in 1236, Alexander was appointed sole ruler of Novgorod. His marriage in 1239 to the daughter of the ruler of Polotsk was intended to strengthen regional alliances. But the young, inexperienced ruler soon found his rule being tested, both east and west. In 1240, Pope Gregory instigated a crusade against Novgorod, citing their alleged neglect to convert pagans to Christianity. The Swedes, led by Bishop Thomas of Finland, raided Novgorod, but Alexander repulsed them at the Neva River, earning him the nickname Nevski and widespread esteem. Meanwhile, an army composed of Teutonic, Estonian, Danish and saber-toothed knights captured the Russian city of Pskov. However, they left a small garrison. They then captured Izborsk and the stone fortress of Koporye. Danish intervention diminished with the death of King Valdemar, but the Livonian Order sought to exploit the situation, violating treaties and invading Novgorod and northern Estonia. Pskov, a vassal of Novgorod, asked for assistance. Upon learning of Pskov's fall, Alexander was furious and, contrary to his wariness of the Mongols, demanded a swift response. He gathered an army and launched a counterattack on the knights stationed in its garrison. Supported by his brother Andrei's forces, he decisively recaptured Koporye in 1241. The fall of Pskov the following year dealt a severe blow to the Crusaders, as Alexander's forces were considered liberated. Contrary to its promising start, the Livonian Order's power was weakened after some of its knights had participated in the Battle of Lignitz the previous year. Alexander did not stop there. He decided to launch a punitive expedition into the lands of the Livonian Order south of Dorpat. His goal was to destabilize the Order and demonstrate its fighting ability. While he was devastating the Order's lands, the Bishop of Dorpat hastened to assemble an army to repel the invading Russians. After a small ambush, in which the expeditionary force was wiped out in Novgorod, the army advanced rapidly. Alexander learned of this from some of the expeditionary force's survivors. He retreated, perhaps with the aim of luring the Crusaders into a hasty attack, taking advantage of their extended position and lack of popular support. He decided to head east toward the Novgorod lands across Lake Peipus, one of the largest lakes in Europe. On the morning of April 5, 1242, Lake Peipus, with its flat shore and shallow strait, provided a strategic crossing point. Both sides crossed the frozen lake, although the ice was rough and treacherous. Alexander's scouts likely alerted him to the pursuing Crusaders, prompting him to turn north to the Crow Rock area to gain a tactical advantage. The Livonian Order, composed mainly of German knights, formed the core of the Crusader army. Alongside them were seasonal Crusaders and infantry, including German, Danish and Scandinavian mercenaries, making it a diverse force. The Danish Estonia managed to muster 200 knights with the help of local auxiliary troops. The Teutonic knights numbered 350. The Russian army, on the other hand, was more diverse, comprising tribal aristocrats, peasant militias and mounted archers. Alexander positioned his diverse army on the shores of Lake Peipus. The archers were positioned in the centre, ready to rain a hail of arrows on the advancing Crusaders. Surrounding them were mounted archers, ready to harass the enemy's flanks with hit-and-run tactics. The infantry, composed of tribal aristocrats and peasant militias, formed a solid defensive line. Alexander's forces numbered over 6,000, significantly outnumbering the Crusaders. The engagement began with a swift charge by the Teutonic cavalry. The Crusaders, probably aiming to capture Alexander, charged in a wedge formation, attempting to break through the centre of the Russian army. Without their prince, the Russians would have faltered due to their lack of leadership. This fact was not lost on the Germans nor on Alexander. The Russian centre faltered under the Crusader attack, but the troops held firm. Most of the fighting took place on the shore, not on the frozen lake, where the armoured Crusader cavalry penetrated the fixed Russian line. Alexander's auxiliary cavalry archers, both Turks and Mongols, then targeted the Danish flank of the Crusader force with pinpoint accuracy. The Danes found themselves facing an elusive enemy, raining death from afar. Arrows rained relentlessly down on the stunned Danish forces. The Estonians and Danes either fell in their positions or fled, seeking any escape from certain death. Despite the initial momentum, the Crusader cavalry soon grew weary of their haphazard assault across the ice and the fierce fighting along the shore. Meanwhile, the Russian left flank, led by Druzhina Nevsky, halted the Crusaders' right flank and joined forces with the infantry to surround their centre. The Russian prince then released the Druzhina and ordered them to surround the besieged Crusaders. The Russian knights, eager for battle, bypassed the Crusaders and rushed them from the rear, revealing the dangerous predicament facing the Germans and their allies. The struggle intensified as the Crusaders fought not only for survival but also for escape. Encircled, they began to surrender to the victorious Russian swords. As the fighting intensified, the Estonian auxiliary forces, realizing the size of the Russian forces, hesitated to advance and eventually fled the battlefield, leaving their knights behind. As the battle raged, the remnants of the Crusader centre broke through the Russian encirclement, suffering heavy losses, including the loss of elite cavalry. In a desperate attempt to escape this dangerous situation, the Crusader wings retreated across the lake, following the Estonian auxiliary forces that had already fled. Elements of both Russian wings pursued the defeated Crusader units across the lake. Despite their efforts, the pursuit did not extend beyond the frozen reed beds and marshes along the lake's western shore. Casualty figures from German and Russian sources, while fairly consistent, are subject to exaggeration and uncertainty. The Novgorod Chronicle's assertion of 400 German and Danish casualties likely included the elite 20 Teutonic knights mentioned in the harmonious Livonian chronicles. The ferocity of the personal fighting is evidenced by the fact that only 6 knights were captured, a rarity in an era when high ransoms were common. However, due to the fog of war and subsequent events, accurate casualty figures remain elusive. Alexander's return to Pskov and Novgorod was celebrated, laden with war booty including wealth, horses, armour, captives tethered to their horses, and other captured beasts of burden. His fame spread far and wide. Peace negotiations returned the conquered lands to Novgorod, but sparked a 7-year civil revolt in the Crusader lands. Alexander remained focused on his own land and made no attempt to invade or occupy Livonia. However, as the Livonian order suffered its losses, a greater danger loomed in the east, the rise of a powerful and ambitious Mongol leader who would soon test the fragile stability that Alexander Nevsky had so ardently sought to achieve.